My name is Harper Myers. I was 34, 8 weeks pregnant, and standing on a hotel terrace the night my mother-in-law decided I was a liar. I had practiced 2 words all week. We're pregnant. I never got to say them the way I planned. Patricia looked at my husband, then at me, and she said the thing this family would spend the next year trying to bury. What she did in the 90 seconds after that put me in a hospital, and put every one of them somewhere worse. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, quiet stories about ordinary women, impossible families, and the moment everything finally turns. If a story like this has ever felt close to home, you're among friends here. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I should tell you who I was before that terrace, because the family kept a version of me that was never true. I'm a labor and delivery nurse. 12 years on the floor, most of them nights. I've caught babies during ice storms and held mothers who went home with empty arms. The work made me precise. I write everything down. Times, doses, who said what, and exactly when they said it. My charting is so clean the residents joke I'd notarize a grocery list. I bought my house at 29. A small brick rancher with a crooked porch, paid for on a nurse's salary and 10 years of skipped vacations. Nobody handed it to me. I met Adam Whitlock at a hospital fundraiser I almost skipped. He was easy, quick to laugh, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and your mother's birthday. We married 2 years later in my backyard. Under string lights, I hung myself. I kept my own last name. It felt like keeping a piece of the woman who had earned every nail in that crooked porch. Adam's family came from money, the old kind that never discusses it because it never has to. I didn't care about that. I had my floor, my house, and my charts. What I didn't understand yet was how a habit can look like a weapon to people who have never once had to prove anything. They decided my careful records meant I was cold, calculating, a woman keeping score. They were about to learn what careful actually does when it's pointed at the truth. I kept records of everything that year. I just didn't know yet which one would end up saving my life, and the small life I was carrying. The Whitlocks ran on one engine, and her name was Patricia. She was 62, silver-haired, and she sat at the head of every table whether or not it was her house. The family money lived in something called the Whitlock Family Trust. $10 million, give or take. And Patricia was the trustee. That meant she decided who got what, and when, and whether they had behaved. Her husband Gerald, 64, mostly nodded. Her daughter Brooke, 33, mostly waited. And Adam, 36, ran a small development firm that floated on money the trust loaned him whenever a project ran thin. I didn't fully see that leash at first. I saw a charming man who got nervous before family dinners and called his mother twice a day. Before the wedding, Gerald sat us both down about a prenuptial agreement. The trust assets stay Whitlock, he said, no matter what. I signed it the same afternoon. I almost laughed doing it. I had my own house, and my own paycheck, and zero interest in their 10 million. Sign it twice if it helps anyone sleep, I told him. Adam looked embarrassed. His mother looked satisfied, like a woman confirming a suspicion she hadn't voiced. I filed my copy of the prenup in the same drawer where I keep my nursing license and my house deed. 3 documents. All of them mine. All of them proof of a life I built myself. I thought that drawer was just good organization. It would turn out to be the foundation of everything. Patricia treated me politely and watched me constantly. I told myself rich families were just like that. Careful. Then I got pregnant, and careful turned into something with teeth. I found out on a Tuesday, between a delivery and a coffee that went cold. 2 lines. I sat in the staff bathroom and cried the good kind of tears, the quiet kind. At 8 weeks, I went in for the first scan. The tech turned the screen and there it was, a flicker the size of a blueberry, a heartbeat going like a hummingbird. She printed me a photo. Grainy, gray, with my name and the date stamped in the corner, and the measurement that said everything was right on time. I held that little square of paper the whole drive, and I'm not ashamed to say I talked to it. We're going to be okay, I told it. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my purse, the zippered one. where I keep the things I can't lose. Adam cried when I told him. Real tears, both hands over his mouth. We decided to announce it at Patricia's 62nd birthday dinner, that Saturday, on the rooftop terrace of the Marlowe Hotel. A gift on top of a gift, Adam said. His mother loves an occasion. I wanted to believe that mattering to her would change how she looked at me. The only off note that week was Brooke. I ran into her at the pharmacy and told her I was excited for the dinner. She went still. Then she smiled with her mouth only and said, "You always know how to make an entrance." I drove home turning that over. I almost asked Adam about it. I decided I was being sensitive, a pregnant woman reading shadows. I had the photo. I had good news. I thought good news was a thing you could simply give people. The Marlowe Terrace sat 11 floors up, all glass railing and string lights, and a low stone planter wall along the garden side. Below that wall was a sunken patio, maybe 10 feet down, ringed with boxwoods and a fountain. I noticed it the way nurses notice things, automatically. Mind the drop, I thought, and tucked it away. The party was 30 people. Cousins, an aunt, 2 of Gerald's golf friends, a string trio in the corner. My friend Maggie Doyle came as my plus perspective, a charge nurse from my floor who Adam liked and who I trusted more than most of my own family. Patricia greeted me at the elevator with a cheek that didn't quite touch mine. "Harper," she said. "You came," as if attendance had been in doubt. I handed her a wrapped box of the imported tea she pretended to like. She set it down without looking. Across the terrace, I caught Patricia and Brooke standing close by the bar, heads bent, talking low and fast. When I walked over to say hello, they stopped at the exact same moment, the way people do when the subject just arrived. Brooke straightened her dress. Patricia smiled the wide, bright smile she used in photographs. Maggie clocked it too. She touched my elbow and murmured, "They rehearsed something." I told her she was imagining things. I was good at telling myself that. Adam appeared with 2 club sodas and whispered that we'd tell everyone after the toast. My heart was up in my throat the good way. I had the photo in my purse and a speech in my head, 11 floors up, with the people I was trying to belong to. I waited for the cake. I should have watched the wall. The cake came out at 9. Patricia made her wish. The trio played, and Adam tapped his glass. He looked at me, and I felt the whole terrace turn. "We have something to share," he said, and his voice cracked with happiness. "We're going to have a baby." For 1 second it was perfect. An aunt gasped, a cousin clapped, Maggie beamed. Then Patricia set down her champagne with a click that cut through everything. She looked at Adam, then at me, slow, the way you'd examine a check you suspect is forged, and she said it loud enough for 30 people. "There's no baby," she said, "only a price tag." The string trio stopped. Somebody's glass paused halfway to their mouth. I actually laughed, one stunned syllable, because I thought I'd misheard. Patricia did not laugh. She turned to the room like a woman presenting evidence. "My son is worth $10 million, she said, and suddenly there's a baby that nobody's seen. How convenient. Real mothers don't need 10 million reasons." The aunt's face went gray. A cousin looked at his shoes. Adam said, "Mom, stop." But it came out small. A boy's voice, not a husband's. I felt the photo in my purse like it weighed 40 pounds. I wanted to pull it out and wave it. I didn't. Some cold professional part of me, the part that runs codes while everyone else panics, said quietly, "Not here. Not like this." I said only, "I'm 8 weeks. I have a heartbeat on a screen." Patricia stepped toward me, and her face wasn't angry. That was the part I couldn't process. She looked certain, righteous, like a woman who had seen this exact trick before and sworn she'd never be fooled by it again. Why she was so certain, I would not understand for months. She kept coming. Not loud now, lower, which was worse, because the room had to lean in. "You've been circling this family since the day you met him," she said, the careful little nurse with her careful little records. "You think I don't know the type." I held my ground by the planter wall. Patricia, I said, I'm not going to do this in front of your guests. Tell them the truth then, she said. Show them. Prove there's a baby. Prove it right now. I felt the stone wall against the back of my thighs. Maggie was moving toward us through the crowd, but the crowd had gone still and dense the way crowds do when they sense a scene and don't want to miss it. Gerald said, Patricia, that's enough. In the tone of a man who had said that sentence for 40 years and never once meant it enough to act. Adam stood frozen between his mother and his wife, choosing the worst thing a person can choose, which is nothing. I looked Patricia in the eye, and I said the steadiest sentence I had. There is a heartbeat, and you will meet your grandchild whether you apologize or not. Her jaw tightened. And then she said it. Flat. Almost quiet. The way you'd snap a twig. Then prove it. She reached out. I think a part of her only meant to seize my purse, to grab the proof and inspect it like a forgery, to win the argument with her hands. But she shoved instead. Both palms, hard, into my shoulders. The stone caught me behind the knees. The string lights tilted. I heard Maggie scream my name from very far away, and the sky and the terrace and the 11 floors all changed places. I did not fall 11 floors. I want to say that plainly because the family later tried to make the distance into the whole story. I went over the low planter wall and down into the sunken patio, 10 feet onto a bed of boxwoods and stone edging. 10 feet is enough. I landed on my right side. I heard my wrist break before I felt it. A sound like a green branch. My ribs hit the stone border of the fountain. The air left me completely. For a moment, I couldn't pull any back in, and the only thought in my head was the photo, the heartbeat, the blueberry. Above me, the terrace erupted. Voices, a chair going over, somebody yelling to call an ambulance. Adam appeared at the top of the wall, and then he was scrambling down, not using the stairs, climbing down the stone like an animal, and that part I will give him. He reached me, and he was shaking. Don't move, he kept saying. Don't move. I've got you, the baby. Oh God, the baby. He was crying so hard he couldn't dial. Maggie did. She came down the proper stairs at a dead run and dropped to her knees beside me and went instantly into nurse voice, calm and flat and total. Harper, talk to me. Pain where? Are you bleeding? She had 2 fingers on my pulse and her eyes on my belly. I got one sentence out before the sirens. Get the photo, I told her. It's in the zip pocket. She didn't ask why. She reached into my purse and took out that small gray square, smudged now with garden dirt, and she held it up in front of my face. Still here, she said. Both of you. Hold on. I knew the emergency department they took me to. I'd floated there in nursing school. There is a special terror in being the patient on a floor you understand too well, because you know exactly which silences are bad. They wheeled me past the trauma bay and straight to OB triage, which told me the charge nurse had read my chart and made a choice. A tech wrapped my right wrist while another found the fetal monitor. The cast went on cool and heavy, plastered to the knuckles, my fingers sticking out pink and useless. I would wear it 6 weeks. I would come to hate it and to need it, because it was the one thing on my body that the family could never argue away. Then the doctor pressed the Doppler low on my belly and the whole room held its breath, including me, the nurse who knew better than to hope out loud. Static. Static. And then a sound like a galloping horse. Fast and even and absolutely furious to be alive. 158 beats a minute. I cried then. Finally, ugly and grateful, my casted hand over my mouth. The placenta showed a small bleed, they told me, an abruption scare, and I'd need monitoring and rest. But the heartbeat was strong, and the baby was measuring right on time. Right on time. The same words from the same kind of machine that Patricia had called a price tag 4 hours earlier. Adam stood in the corner of the room, shaking, gray, useless, holding the dirty ultrasound photo in both hands like it might break. His phone kept buzzing in his pocket. He kept looking at it. Even then. Even there. I watched my husband choose which screen to look at, and I started, quietly, to understand my marriage. If you've ever lain in a hospital bed doing math on the people you trusted, counting who showed up and who kept checking their phone, you already understand this part. Stay with me. What I learned in that bed changed everything I did next, and it had nothing to do with shouting. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how it turned. The phone in Adam's pocket was Patricia's lawyer. He admitted that at 1 in the morning, in the hallway, in a low voice he thought I couldn't hear through a door that doesn't close all the way. I was supposed to be sleeping. Nurses don't sleep in hospitals. We just close our eyes. I heard him say, "She went over the wall." Yes. I heard him say, "It happened so fast." And then I heard the sentence that turned my stomach colder than the fall had. "I don't think Mom pushed her exactly. Maybe Harper leaned too far back. We were all standing close. Maybe. Exactly. Leaned." 3 soft words, and my husband was sanding the edges off the truth while I lay there with a cast on my arm and a bruise the shape of 2 hands on my shoulders. I lifted my gown later in the bathroom mirror and photographed those bruises with my left hand, badly, because that is what 12 years of charting teaches you. Document first, feel later. When Adam came back in, I asked him, plainly, who he'd been talking to. "Just family," he said. "They're worried." I said, "Your mother put me in this bed." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "We don't know that," he said. It was chaos. And there it was. The first real crack. Hairline but clean through. My husband had decided the safest story was the one where nobody had done anything, because the alternative meant choosing me over the woman who controlled the money he lived on. I didn't argue. Arguing was Patricia's weapon, the public scene, the raised voice, the crowd. I just looked at him until he looked away. Then I asked the night nurse for a copy of my own chart. She understood completely. She brought 2. They discharged me after 3 days of monitoring. Adam drove me to my own house, the brick rancher with the crooked porch, and I noticed he packed a bag for himself like a guest. That afternoon, the Whitlocks held what Brooke called a family meeting in my living room, uninvited, 4 of them on the furniture I'd paid for. Patricia did not come. She sent Brooke as her mouth. Brooke sat very straight and delivered it like a statement she'd practiced in a mirror. "We think, for everyone's sake, that there's a version of this that protects the family," she said. The version she'd built was breathtaking. In it, I had staged the fall. I had thrown myself over a 10-foot wall, 8 weeks pregnant, to manufacture sympathy and lock Adam in and pry open the trust. "Mom barely touched you," Brooke said. "You were unstable. You'd been making comments about money for months." I had never once made a comment about their money. I sat there with my casted arm in my lap, and I felt something settle in me, quiet and final. This wasn't grief or shock anymore. This was a coordinated thing. They'd had a story ready before I'd left the hospital, the same way they'd had something ready by the bar before the toast. Gerald studied the carpet. Adam said nothing. Again, his great skill. I asked one question, evenly. If I staged it, who broke my wrist? Brooke had no answer for that, so she stood and smoothed her dress, the same gesture from the terrace, and said, "We're trying to help you, Harper." They left a number for Patricia's attorney on my own coffee table. I waited until their cars were gone. Then I called the only person who'd actually run down those stairs. Maggie came over with takeout and a legal pad, which is the most Maggie combination of items that exists. She sat at my kitchen table and let me be furious for exactly 10 minutes. Then she capped my anger like a vein. "Okay," she said. "Now we stop reacting and start building. Here's what they want, Harper. They want you loud. They want you to call 30 relatives and scream that Patricia pushed you. Because then it's 2 women yelling different stories, and the family closes around the rich one, and you're the unstable nurse who married up. Don't give them that." I asked her what the alternative was. She tapped the legal pad with her pen. "You win this the way you chart a code," she said. "Cold. Documented. In order. You don't have to convince anyone of anything. You just have to be the only person in the room holding paper." We made a list that night, the 2 of us, And the list was the first time since the terrace that I felt like myself again. My hospital records, with the wrist fracture and the rib contusions and the bruise pattern. The photos I'd taken in the mirror, the Doppler strip with the heartbeat, the very thing Patricia said didn't exist. And then Maggie said the thing that cracked the whole case open. There were cameras, she said. That terrace had cameras. The Marlowe is a hotel, Harper. Hotels record everything. You don't win this loud, you win it documented. I looked at my casted hand resting on her legal pad. For the first time, the cast didn't feel like an injury. It felt like an exhibit. Patricia had a story and a family and $10 million. I had something she'd never respected and never expected. I had the truth. In writing. In order. Adam came back to the house that weekend, ostensibly for clothes, actually to deliver a message he kept rehearsing in the driveway. I watched him through the window do it twice. When he came in, he sat across from me and reached for my good hand. Harper, he said, I love you. I love the baby. But I need you to let this go. I asked him to define this. The cameras, he said. The lawyer. The whole legal thing. If you pull on this, it doesn't stay small. And then his voice dropped, and the real sentence came out. The one he'd driven over to say, don't burn this family down. I let that sit in the room. Then I asked him the question that ended the part of me that was still his wife. What happens to you if I don't drop it? He didn't answer fast enough, and the silence answered for him. So I said it for him. Your mother controls the trust. The trust floats your firm. If you stand next to me, she turns off the money, and your projects collapse, and you become a 36-year-old man with no mother and no money and a wife in a cast. That's it. That's the whole thing. He started to cry, and the awful part was that I believed the tears. Adam wasn't evil. He was owned, and he'd never once in his life had to find out what he'd do without her money, and he was terrified to learn it now. I'm not asking you to choose me, I told him gently, because I was done being cruel before I'd even started. I'm telling you that you already did. I just need you to stop pretending the wall pushed me. He left without his clothes. I changed the locks Monday. With one hand, it took me an hour. The thing that turned a sad story into a winnable one arrived by accident, the way the worst evidence usually does. It was a Wednesday. My phone buzzed with a text from a group I'd never been in, a thread titled Whitlock Family, 26 members. Brooke had been adding cousins to coordinate a memorial fund for an uncle, and her thumb had been faster than her judgment. She added me, sent one logistics message, and then, 4 minutes later, removed me. But 4 minutes is forever on a phone that autoloads history. By the time she pulled me out, the entire thread had downloaded to my device. I sat at my kitchen table and I scrolled up, and my coffee went cold the way it always does in the worst moments of my life. The messages started 9 days before the dinner. 9 days before. Patricia, to the family. We need to handle the Harper situation at the party while everyone's watching. Brooke. What if she really is pregnant? Patricia. Then she'll be ready to prove it, won't she? Make her prove it. In front of everyone. A cousin. Isn't that a little much, Aunt Pat? Patricia. I will not watch this family bled dry by another one. Not again. Brooke. I'll seed it beforehand so nobody's surprised when you call it. There were 11 more like that. A plan with a date and a venue and assigned roles. Brooke would plant the rumor. Patricia would spring it publicly. The terrace wasn't a moment of rage. It was a plan with a guest list. I read it 3 times. I did not scream, did not call anyone, did not fire back into the thread. I did the one thing my whole career had trained me for. I plugged my phone into my laptop and I backed up every message, with timestamps and sender names intact, into 3 places. Then I called my lawyer's office and said the sentence that started the rest of it. I have something I need preserved correctly. People asked me later why I didn't just post the screenshots. Blast the thread to all 26 relatives. Let them watch Patricia indict herself. I understand the appeal, But Maggie's voice was in my head, and so was 12 years of charting, and they said the same thing. Evidence you handle wrong is evidence you can lose. If I dumped it onto the family, Brooke could claim I'd doctored it. The relatives could be pressured into silence, and a judge might wonder why I'd gone to the internet instead of to the law. So I didn't touch the family. I touched the process. I made a decision at that kitchen table that I want to describe carefully, because it's the spine of this whole story. I decided I was done being married to a man who'd been bought before I met him. I decided I would not raise my child inside a family that planned, in writing, to humiliate me. And I decided that I would not get any of this back through a scene. Not a confrontation, not a viral post, not a screaming match Patricia could win with practice. I would get it back the only way the careful nurse knew how. Through paper, through procedure, through the slow patient machinery that doesn't care how loud you are or how much money you have. I called a family law attorney named Diane. No, her name was Joan Reyes, recommended by a doctor I trusted, and I made an appointment. I packed the dirty ultrasound photo, my hospital chart, the mirror photos, and the laptop with the backed up thread into a single folder. My casted hand made it slow. That was fine. I had time. Patricia had spent 9 days planning a single night. I was prepared to spend a year, calmly, getting it right. Joan Reyes had a quiet office and a way of listening that didn't perform sympathy. I laid it all out in order, the way I'd lay out a patient's history. She read the chart, studied the bruise photos, scrolled the thread twice, and set her pen down. Then she told me 3 things that rearranged my world. First, she said, this isn't only a divorce. Assault and battery against a woman the attacker knows to be pregnant can be charged as a felony in this state, and prosecutors here don't ignore it. The group thread proves Patricia knew you claimed to be pregnant and chose violence to test it. That's not a custody footnote. That's the district attorney's business. Second, the hotel's footage. We don't ask the Whitlocks for it, and we don't ask you to have recorded anything. We subpoena the Marlowe directly. Hotels keep terrace cameras for liability, and they keep an incident report from that night with staff signatures. Institutional records. Untouchable. Third, she slid the prenup across the desk, the one Gerald had been so proud to make me sign. Harper, she said, this is the best thing they ever did for you. This document says you cannot touch the trust under any circumstance. It is signed, witnessed, and dated. It is legal proof that you could not have been after the 10 million, because they made sure of it themselves. Their own paper destroys their own accusation. I tapped my cast lightly on the edge of her desk while I took that in. The thing they'd built to keep me out was the thing that would clear my name. Joan smiled the smallest amount. They armed you, she said, and never noticed. We talked for 2 hours. I left with a plan that had dates and filings instead of feelings. For the first time since the terrace, I slept the whole night. Patricia did not see a folder coming because Patricia had never lost. Her first move, once the divorce filing landed, was the move rich families always make. She tried to buy the silence. Brooke called, sugared and brisk. Mom wants to put this behind everyone, she said. We're prepared to offer you $50,000 to walk away clean. No fault, no story. You keep your little house. Everyone moves on. The little house landed exactly as intended. I almost admired the precision of the insult. I held the phone against my shoulder, my good hand on my belly, and I thought about what $50,000 was supposed to mean. It was supposed to mean I had a price, that the whole thing had been a negotiation from the start, and now we'd reached the number. It was Patricia telling me, one more time, that a woman who came from nothing could always be bought by a woman who came from everything. Brooke, I said, I want you to write down my answer exactly because your mother will ask. I'm not after the money. I was never after the money. I have my own house, my own job, and a prenup your family wrote that proves it. I don't want $50,000. I want the truth on the record, and I want my child safe. You can keep the rest. There was a long silence. Then Brooke's voice changed, dropped the sugar, and showed me what was underneath. You think you're so clean, she hissed. You have no idea what you've started. The line went dead. She was right that I'd started something. She was wrong about who'd be buried under it. I wrote down the date and time of the call, the offer, and her last sentence, and I sent it to Joan. Then I went to bed, both of us, and slept again. The subpoena worked. The Marlowe complied within 2 weeks, because hotels do not go to war for guests who shove people off terraces. Joan called me in to watch the footage with her, and she warned me first. "You don't have to see it," she said. "The court will." I watched it anyway. I needed to know what was true with my own eyes, since everyone in that family had spent a month telling me it wasn't. The camera covered the garden side of the terrace, the planter wall, the whole low edge. There was no sound, which somehow made it worse. I watched myself, small and pregnant in a blue dress, standing my ground by the wall. I watched Patricia advance. I watched Adam stand between us and do nothing, frozen. For 11 full seconds I counted them. And then I watched 2 hands come up and shove, clean and hard, both palms into my shoulders, and I watched my body go backward over the stone like something dropped. The footage did not show a woman leaning too far. It did not show chaos or an accident or a misunderstanding. It showed an assault, in high definition, with a timestamp. The incident report came with it. 3 pages, signed by the banquet manager and a server who'd written, in the calm, flat language of a witness, guest Patricia Whitlock pushed guest Harper Myers over the garden wall following a verbal dispute. I read that sentence 4 times. A stranger in a server's uniform had seen exactly what happened and written it down plainly, while my own husband called it leaning. Joan made copies. The lie that the wall pushed me died that afternoon, in a conference room, in silence. People keep asking why I didn't just scream the truth at them on that terrace. Here's what I've learned at 34. The calm ones aren't weak. They're keeping receipts. If that lands for you, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and stay with me for what those receipts did when we finally got in a room. Joan turned the package over to the district attorney's office, and the machine I'd been trusting finally turned over and caught. A detective called me in. She was about my age, unhurried, and she'd already read the chart and seen the footage before I sat down. She asked me to walk her through the night, and I did it in order, with times, the way I do everything. When I finished, she slid a single sheet across the table and told me what they were charging. Aggravated assault and battery against a pregnant person, a felony, because Patricia had been told in front of 30 witnesses and in 9 days of her own text messages that I claimed to be pregnant and had used force anyway to, in her words, make me prove it. The detective tapped the thread printout. "The premeditation elevates it," she said. "This isn't a woman who snapped. This is a woman who scheduled it." They were also looking hard at Brooke for her role in coordinating the public ambush, though that piece was murkier. I asked the detective the question that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. Will they actually charge her? People like the Whitlocks. The detective looked at me for a moment, and then she said something I've kept. "Money buys a lot of things," she said. "It does not buy back a felony with a timestamp and an eyewitness. She doesn't get a pass because her family has a trust." I drove home that day past the hospital where I'd heard the heartbeat, one hand on the wheel, one hand resting on a belly that was just starting to show, and I let myself feel, for the first time, not relief exactly, but the clean, cold certainty that the truth was now bigger than any of them. Adam came to see me one more time, the week the charges were filed, and this is the part of the story I think about most, because it's the part where someone could have changed. He looked terrible, thinner, gray under the eyes, a man who hadn't slept since the terrace. He sat on my porch steps because I didn't invite him in, and he cried, and for once I didn't think the crying was a tactic. "Harper," he said, "I know what she did. I saw the video. I know it wasn't your fault. I know it was never about money." He put his face in his hands, and the words came out wet and broken. "I'm so scared," he said. "She raised me to need her. I don't know who I am without the money. I never had to find out. And I'm finding out it's nobody." For a moment, I almost reached for him. because under the cowardice he was telling the truth, and the truth was sad. He was a 36-year-old boy his mother had kept dependent on purpose, so he'd never be able to leave, so he'd always choose her. I understood him completely. Understanding is not the same as forgiving. So I asked him, quietly, the only thing that mattered, will you tell the truth on the record? Will you say she pushed me? He looked up, and I watched the fear win, the way it always had, the way she'd built him to let it. I can't, he whispered. Her lawyers, they need me to. They wrote a statement for me. And then my husband told me he'd already signed it, the statement that called it an accident, and he asked me to understand. I did understand. I just no longer cared. I told him to leave my porch. He did. Brooke made the mistake people make when they think deleting something is the same as it never existing. Once she realized the Whitlock family thread was in play, she panicked. She went into the group and deleted her old messages, the ones where she'd promised to seed it beforehand, and she had a cousin remove a few too. She thought that erased them. It didn't. The thread had already been preserved. 3 places. Time-stamped. The night her thumb was too fast at the pharmacy. No. The night she added me by accident. Weeks before she ever thought to scrub it. Joan's office had it locked down in discovery. So when the deletions surfaced, they didn't hide Brooke's guilt. They proved her consciousness of it. You don't frantically delete messages that help you. Then she gave a statement to the family's lawyers and contradicted herself inside of 3 sentences. First, she said she'd never discussed the pregnancy before the party. Then she said she'd only mentioned it to a few people to prepare them. Then she said she didn't remember the threat at all. The detective noticed all 3. And somewhere in the financial disclosures, the real shape of Brooke came clear. The part that wasn't about loyalty to her mother at all. The trust distributed by branch and by heir. If Adam had a child, that child became a beneficiary, and Brooke's slice of 10 million got noticeably thinner. A grandchild was not a joy to Brooke. A grandchild was math. She'd helped plan a public humiliation of a pregnant woman because my baby was, to her, a line item that reduced her inheritance. When I understood that, I stopped being angry at Brooke specifically. She was just the clearest example of what the money had done to all of them. It had turned a baby into a threat. I learned why Patricia was the way she was from the aunt who'd gone gray at the dinner, the only Whitlock who ever called to apologize. Her name was Carol, and she told me the story over the phone in a low voice, as if Patricia could hear through the walls of 2 different houses. 30 years ago, Patricia had a younger brother named Wendell. Charming, soft, easy with money, the way Adam was easy. Wendell married a woman the family never trusted, and within a year that woman announced a pregnancy, and Wendell, besotted, rewrote everything in her favor. There was no baby, Carol said. Or there was. And it wasn't his. The family never knew which. And it didn't matter, because by the time the marriage detonated, the woman walked away with half of Wendell's share of the family money, and Wendell walked away with nothing and drank himself small and died at 51. Patricia, Carol said, had been the one to rebuild what was lost. She spent 20 years turning what survived into that 10 million, alone, gripping it like a wound that never healed. And somewhere in there she made a vow, the kind that hardens into a religion. No woman would ever do to her son what that woman did to her brother. Not again. I sat with that for a long time after Carol hung up. It explained Patricia. It made her human, which is the thing I'd been missing. The reason her face on the terrace looked certain instead of cruel. She truly believed she was protecting her family from a thief. But understanding the wound a person carries is not the same as letting them push you off a wall to soothe it. Wendell's grief was real. It did not give Patricia the right to break my wrist. Both things were true. Only one of them was my problem. At 20 weeks, I went in for the anatomy scan, alone. And I want to tell you, it wasn't lonely. Because it wasn't. Maggie offered to come, and I told her to take the shift instead. I'd done the loneliest part already. On a terrace. In front of 30 people. This was just me and the baby and a tech with warm hands. The screen filled up with something that was unmistakably a person now. A spine like a string of pearls. A heart with 4 chambers, all of them working. A profile, a nose, a hand that opened and closed. "It's a girl," the text said, and printed me a new photo. Crisp this time, nothing grainy or blueberry-sized about it. A whole daughter in black and white. I put it in the same zip pocket as the first one, the dirty one, the one Maggie had held up in the garden. 2 photos now. The accusation and the answer. I sat in my car afterward and I made myself a promise out loud, which I don't usually do. "Nobody decides who you are but you," I told her. "That's already settled." Then I called Joan and told her something had changed in me, something I needed her to put into the custody filing in plain language. I would not be seeking shared custody. A woman who would shove me off a wall, and a man who would sign a statement calling it an accident, did not get unsupervised access to my daughter. Not because I was angry, because I was her mother, and protecting her was no longer a feeling. It was a fact, with a heartbeat, measuring right on time. The criminal case and the divorce moved on separate tracks, but they met at one table first, a settlement conference Joan had pushed for, the kind of room where civil matters get resolved before a judge ever needs to. Patricia agreed to it for one reason, the same reason she did everything: control. She believed she could walk into a private room with lawyers and money and make the whole thing disappear the way she'd made every problem disappear for 40 years. Joan told me the night before exactly what would happen. "Patricia will be confident," she said. "She will think she's there to negotiate you down. She doesn't know everything we have, because we filed it, but we haven't shown it to her in one place. In order. Out loud. Tomorrow she finds out." I asked Joan if I had to speak. "You don't have to say much at all," she said. "That's the point. You let the documents talk. The calmer you are, the louder they get." I laid out my clothes that night, a simple navy dress that fit over a 6-month belly, and I put the folder by the door. I wasn't nervous, which surprised me. I'd spent the worst night of my life on a floor I understood too well, listening for a heartbeat in the static. Compared to that, a conference room full of Whitlock lawyers was nothing. Patricia thought she was walking in to win. She'd thought that on the terrace too, with her bright photograph smile and her ready accusation. She had no idea that this time the careful little nurse with her careful little records had spent 6 months doing the one thing Patricia had never respected in her life: getting it right. She walked in like she'd already won. She had no idea what was on the table. The conference room had a long table and too much light, and I got there first on purpose. I sat with my back to the window so the morning sun was behind me and in their eyes, a trick I'd learned watching Patricia run rooms. Joan sat to my right with the folder closed in front of her. By the time the Whitlocks arrived, I was 6 months along and unmistakable, and I watched them clock it as they came through the door. Patricia in cream, regal, 2 lawyers flanking her like a security detail. Gerald, smaller than I remembered. Brooke, who wouldn't meet my eyes. And Adam, last, against the far wall, a man attending his own funeral. Patricia sat across from me and folded her hands and looked at my belly with the same expression from the terrace, that certainty, that "I know your type." "We're here," her lead lawyer began, "to discuss a reasonable resolution that protects all parties and avoids unnecessary," and Patricia cut him off, because Patricia could never resist a stage. "Let's not pretend," she said to me directly. "You found a soft man and a hard number, and you made a plan. I've seen it before. I will not watch this family blood dry again." There it was. The same engine. The same wound she'd been feeding for 30 years, mistaking me for a ghost named Wendell's wife. I didn't answer her. I'd promised Joan and I'd promised myself. I rested my casted hand, healed now but still my reminder, flat on the table beside the closed folder, and I let her keep going, because every sentence she said was a sentence she'd have to live with once the folder opened. Joan glanced at me. I gave the smallest nod. She opened it. And then, one page at a time, Calm as a chart review, we began to take Patricia Whitlock's whole life apart on the table in front of her family. Patricia did not go quietly, because women who have never lost do not recognize the early stages of losing. As Joan reached for the first document, Patricia leaned forward and went on the attack, the only mode she had. "You want money," she said. "Just say it. Say you want the 10 million and let's stop the theater." Her lawyer touched her arm. She shook him off. "My son is a fool, but he's my fool," she said. "And you saw an opening, and you got yourself pregnant to take it. That's all this is. That's all you are." The room flinched. Gerald closed his eyes. And here is the thing I want you to understand about that moment, because it's the whole reason I'm telling you this story, instead of nursing a grudge in private. I felt the old heat rise in my chest, the urge to stand up and match her, to finally let 30 people, no, 6 people, hear what she'd done to me. And I didn't. I sat still. I kept my voice exactly where it had been on the terrace, the steady place, the place that runs codes while the room panics. "Patricia," I said, and that was all. Just her name, level and quiet, the way you say a name to someone who's lost track of where they are. She expected fury. Fury she knew how to fight. She'd been fighting a furious dead woman for 30 years. She did not know what to do with calm. It unbalanced her more than any scream could have. She kept talking. Faster now. Louder. Filling my silence with more of herself. And every word landed in the record. I let her. Joan slid the first page across the table, and the room stopped listening to Patricia's voice and started reading. Joan laid them down in order, and I narrated each one in the flat, clean voice I use for handoff at shift change, because that voice has never once failed me. First, the ultrasound. 2 of them, side by side, the grainy 8-week flicker and the crisp 20-week girl, name and date stamped on both. "There's no baby," I said, repeating Patricia's own words back into the quiet, only a price tag. I slid the photos until they sat directly in front of her. "This is the baby. She's a girl. She'll be born in March." Patricia's eyes dropped to the images and her mouth opened and nothing came out. Second, the hotel footage, on Joan's laptop. The silent high-definition clip of 2 hands shoving a pregnant woman over a wall while a husband stood frozen for 11 seconds. We played it once. Nobody breathed. Third, the incident report, signed by a banquet manager and a server, a stranger's plain handwriting describing exactly what the cameras showed. Fourth, the Whitlock family thread, 9 days of planning, printed and tabbed, Patricia's own sentence highlighted in yellow. "Make her prove it." In front of everyone. And fifth, last, Joan placed the prenuptial agreement on top of the pile, the document Gerald had been so proud to make me sign. "This," Joan said, "is the agreement your family drafted. It legally bars Harper from any claim to the trust. She could not have been after your 10 million. You made certain of it yourselves, in writing 3 years ago." Then I said the only other thing I'd planned to say all day. "On the terrace," I told Patricia. "You told me to prove it." I looked at the folder, then at her. "I did," I said. "It's all here." Patricia stared at the prenup, the one weapon she'd built to keep me out, now lying on top of the proof that cleared me, and I watched the certainty drain out of her face like color out of a photograph left in the sun. Then she broke, and it was nothing like the controlled woman who'd run that terrace. First came the tears, fast and theatrical, aimed at the lawyers. "You see what she's done," Patricia said. "She's twisted everything. She's manipulated all of you." When the tears bought her nothing, because tears don't move a timestamp, the rage came up underneath them. She stood, and her chair scraped, and she pointed at me across the table with a shaking hand. "I was protecting this family," she shouted. "Do you know what that woman did to Wendell? Do you have any idea what I rebuilt with my own 2 hands while all of you spent it?" Her own lawyer was on his feet now, saying her name. "Patricia. Patricia. Sit down. Please stop talking." She didn't stop. That was the thing about Patricia. She had never once in her life stopped talking when it could save her. She turned on Gerald, who'd never protected anyone, and she turned on Brooke, who'd done exactly what she was told, and she turned on Adam, her own son, and screamed, "You're all weak. You're all useless. I am the only one who ever." And there she ran out of sentence, standing in a conference room with her family staring at the table instead of at her, having indicted herself in front of every person whose opinion she'd spent a lifetime controlling. Adam was crying against the wall. Brooke was gray. Gerald looked 100 years old. And I sat in the steady place with my healed hand flat on the table, and my daughter turning slow somersaults under my navy dress. And I did not say one word, because she was doing all of my work for me, and because the calmest person in a room is always, in the end, the one who's already won. It ended quickly after that, the way things do once everyone in the room has seen the truth at the same time. There was no soaring speech. Real justice is mostly paperwork. The felony charge held because a timestamp and an eyewitness and 9 days of premeditation do not negotiate, and the district attorney made clear there would be no quiet dismissal for a Whitlock. The settlement Joan secured was not the $10 million I'd never wanted. It was a personal injury settlement for the assault. Paid by Patricia personally, my medical costs and damages, recorded as my separate property under the very prenup they'd written. I kept my house, which had always been mine. And in the custody filing, a documented violent felony against a pregnant woman, plus a husband who'd signed a false statement to cover it, made the outcome almost administrative. I was granted a temporary custody order and an approved parenting plan before my daughter was even born, both pointing in one direction. She would be in my sole care. The trust did the last piece by itself. Its own terms let the other co-trustees suspend any trustee indicted for a felony and remove one for good upon conviction. So the day Patricia was charged, they suspended her, and her guilty plea later made it permanent. The woman who shoved me off a wall to protect $10 million lost her grip on the $10 million by shoving me off a wall. Nobody had to engineer that. She'd built the trap and then walked into it herself. I gathered my folder, and Joan and I stood, and I walked out of that conference room into an ordinary Tuesday morning, 6 months pregnant, with a healed wrist and a clear name. I did not look back at any of them. I was done looking back. My daughter was born in March, 7 pounds even, screaming and furious and perfect, on the same floor where I'd once heard her heartbeat in the static. I named her Wren. Sole custody was finalized within weeks of her birth, exactly as the temporary order had promised. The divorce was final 2 weeks before she arrived. Patricia took a plea that kept her out of prison, but left a felony on her record. The first thing in her life that money could not erase, and she is no longer trustee of anything. Brooke is no longer speaking to her mother, less from conscience than from the discovery that her thinner inheritance came with a felony attached to the family name. Gerald sends a card on holidays that I do not open. Adam asked, through his lawyer, for supervised visitation, and I have not closed that door entirely, because Wren is allowed to know her father someday, if he ever becomes a person worth knowing. But he is not raising her, and he is not deciding who she is. He made his choice on a terrace when he stood frozen for 11 seconds, and again on my porch, when he signed their statement. A person shows you who they are. I just believed him the second time. I keep both ultrasound photos in a frame on my dresser now, the grainy one and the crisp one, the accusation and the answer, side by side where I see them every morning. I am still a labor and delivery nurse. I still write everything down. The crooked porch still needs painting. None of it is dramatic, and that is exactly the point. I built a quiet life with my own 2 hands, and a loud family tried to take it, and the quiet life won. Maggie is Wren's godmother. She comes over on her days off and holds the baby while I sleep, and sometimes we sit on the crooked porch and don't say much, which is the best kind of friendship there is. She told me once, rocking Wren, that she'd been afraid that night in the garden, more afraid than she'd let me see. I know, I said. You held up the photo anyway. People ask me sometimes, when the story comes up, whether I ever wanted to scream at Patricia, to make her feel what she'd done. The honest answer is yes, on the terrace. for about 1 second. But I'd have lost everything if I'd screamed. The scream was the trap. The folder was the way out. I never needed their $10 million, and I never wanted it. And the most satisfying part of all of this was getting to prove that in writing. I came from nothing and built something, and no one gets to call that something a price tag. Not anymore. Ren will grow up knowing her mother stayed calm and kept her receipts, and walked away with her dignity and her daughter. That's the whole inheritance I care about. If there's one thing I want you to take from a brick rancher with a crooked porch, it's this. The truth doesn't need you to shout. It just needs you to stay calm enough to keep it and brave enough to set it down on the table in front of everyone. That's my story. One terrace, one lie, and a folder of paper that spoke louder than any argument ever could. If this reminded you that walking away with your dignity is the real win, take that as your sign today. If you know someone who needs to hear it, share this video with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.